Have you ever stopped to think about what really happens when someone disappears without a trace? I'm not talking about horror movies or urban legends. I'm talking about real people who entered abandoned places in Ontario during the winter and were simply never seen again. No body, no footprints in the snow, no explanation. Canadian winters are unforgiving. When temperatures plummet to -30 degrees Celsius and snow begins to blanket everything, even the busiest places transform into silent death traps. Now imagine what happens in places abandoned decades ago. Frozen mines where miners died buried alive, ghost towns that literally exploded overnight, psychiatric hospitals where patients disappeared from locked rooms. These places exist, and the stories I'm going to tell you today are based on official records, police investigations, and accounts from witnesses who are still alive to tell what they saw. Have you ever experienced this? That shiver down your spine when you feel something isn't right? That feeling of being watched in a place where you should be completely alone? Now multiply that by 100 and put it in the context of a place where people have actually disappeared. Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover might make you rethink everything you thought you knew about Ontario. 5 places, 5 stories of disappearances, and a question no one can answer. What happens when extreme cold, absolute isolation, and a blood-stained past meet at a single point on the map? The answer may lie in the snow that still covers these places to this day. Before I continue, I need to ask you something. If you're feeling that chill down your spine right now, if this kind of story fascinates you as much as it fascinates me, leave a comment below. It can be anything: a haunted place you know, a strange experience you've had, or simply tell me which of these 5 places you would never have the courage to visit. I read all the comments, truly, and this exchange with you is what motivates me to continue researching and bringing you these real stories that nobody else tells. And look, if you're enjoying the content so far, click the like button. It seems simple, but this small gesture makes an enormous difference in getting the channel recommended to more people who also love mysteries and true stories like we do. And if you're not yet subscribed, subscribe now and activate the bell, because every week I bring you content like this: in-depth investigations, abandoned places, unexplained disappearances, always based on real facts. Your participation here is what makes this channel grow and reach more people who also want to know the dark and mysterious side of Canada. So, count on me to continue bringing you these stories, and I count on you to be part of this community. Now, let's get to what really matters. Let's dive deep into the 5 most haunted places in Ontario where people disappeared in the snow. Local 1. Spruce Falls Ghost Town. The winter that never lets you leave. The first stop on this somber journey takes us to Spruce Falls, a town that should be completely dead, but refuses to let go of the past. Spruce Falls isn't just another ghost town lost on the Ontario map. It's a place that seems to exist outside of time, especially when winter arrives and the snow begins to cover everything. Residents of neighboring towns don't talk much about Spruce Falls, but when they do, they always use the same expression: that place is stuck. Stuck in time, stuck in the cold, stuck in something that no one can quite explain, but everyone feels when they're there. Let's get to the facts. Spruce Falls was an industrial town that thrived for decades, but when business operations began to decline, people simply left. Houses were abandoned with furniture inside. Shops closed their doors and never reopened. Huge industrial structures were left behind as skeletons of metal and concrete. And here comes the part no one likes to talk about. During the harshest winters, people passing through Spruce Falls began to disappear. We're not talking about 1 or 2 isolated cases. We're talking about a pattern that repeated itself over decades, always under the same conditions: snowstorm, extreme cold, and someone who decided to pass through the abandoned town. The most disturbing account comes from a truck driver named George, who one night in January 1987 had to detour off the main road because of a snow-blocked road. He knew the area and knew that by going through Spruce Falls he could get back to the main highway. What he didn't expect was what would happen when he entered the town. George described the feeling as if he had crossed an invisible line. The wind stopped completely. The sound of the truck's engine became muffled, as if something was absorbing the noise. And then he saw the houses, dark windows, half-open doors swaying slightly, even without wind. He accelerated, trying to get through the town as quickly as possible. But that's when he noticed something that made his blood run cold. There were recent footprints in the snow beside the road, footprints leading into one of the abandoned houses. but there were no footprints coming out. George didn't stop. He floored the accelerator and sped out of Spruce Falls without looking back. But the story doesn't end there. 3 days later, authorities found an abandoned car on one of Spruce Falls' main streets. The engine was off, the doors locked from the inside, but there was no one in the vehicle. The snow around the car was completely smooth, with no tracks indicating entry or exit. The driver, a 34-year-old man returning from a business trip, was never found. His last phone call was to his wife, saying he was lost and would stop in a town to ask for directions. That town was Spruce Falls. What makes this place even more unsettling is the transformation it undergoes during winter. Visitors who explored the city during the summer describe it as a sad, melancholic place, but relatively normal for a ghost town. But when the snow arrives, something changes. The atmosphere becomes heavy, the silence is suffocating, and people begin to report phenomena that defy any rational explanation. Lights flickering in windows of houses without electricity, sounds of footsteps echoing in empty streets, and, most disturbing of all, the feeling that someone is always watching you from the shadows, waiting for the right moment to reveal their hidden truth. There is a local theory that says Spruce Falls won't let you leave if you stay too long after dark during a snowstorm. It's as if the town has its own rules, its own decisions about who can enter and who can leave, and those who ignore the signs, those who underestimate the impact that cold and isolation can have on the human mind, end up becoming part of the town forever. Their names are added to the silent list of people who entered Spruce Falls and never left. Now, I know this might sound like a movie plot, but the records are there. The police reports exist. The families of these missing people are still searching for answers, and Spruce Falls remains there, waiting for the next winter, the next storm, the next traveler who will make the wrong choice. If you feel that this place holds something beyond what we can see, comment below. Spruce Falls scares me. I want to know if you would have the courage to spend a night in this town. Local 2, St. Thomas Psychiatric Hospital. Voices that follow you in the snow. But if you thought Spruce Falls was the limit of disturbing, I need to take you to a place that stirs something much deeper in the human psyche. I'm talking about St. Thomas Psychiatric Hospital, an abandoned complex that shouldn't exist anymore, but which continues to live on in a way that no one can explain. Psychiatric hospitals always carry a heavy energy. They are places where people suffered, where inhumane treatments were applied in the name of science, where screams echoed through cold corridors for decades. But when you add the Canadian winter to that equation, when the snow begins to cover the abandoned buildings and the cold penetrates the cracked walls, something happens. Something that transforms St. Thomas from a simple ruin into a portal to experiences that challenge everything we think we know about reality. The hospital functioned for decades as an institution for people with severe mental health problems. Lobotomies were performed there, shock therapies were routine, patients were restrained for days in windowless isolation rooms, and when the hospital finally closed its doors in the 1980s, it left behind not only empty structures, but memories ingrained in the walls, the floor, the very air you breathe when you enter that place. The psychological impact of being in such an environment is something you couldn't prepare for until you experience it. And many people who experienced it were never the same again. Let's talk about Jennifer, a 29-year-old urban explorer who decided to photograph St. Thomas in December 2009. She was experienced, having explored dozens of abandoned places throughout Ontario, and didn't believe in ghost stories. To her, they were just empty buildings with a sad past. But her mindset completely changed that night. Jennifer entered the hospital around 6 in the afternoon, when the sun was already setting. She planned to stay only 2 hours, enough time to capture the photos she wanted. What she didn't expect was that time inside St. Thomas didn't work the same way as in the outside world. She described the first few minutes as normal. Long corridors, open doors, swaying slightly in the wind that streamed through broken windows, graffiti on the walls. But then she began to hear voices. They weren't loud, they weren't clear, but they were there, whispers that seemed to come from everywhere at once. She tried to rationalize. Wind, old structure making noises, her own imagination. But then the voices began to say things, loose words, names, and then her own name. Jennifer stopped in the middle of the corridor, camera in hand, heart racing. She knew she was alone. She had checked the entire perimeter before entering, but something was there with her, and that something knew who she was. The most disturbing revelation came when she decided to leave. Jennifer returned through the same corridor she had used to enter, but the door was no longer there. Or rather, it was, but now it was locked, and she hadn't locked it. She tried other exits, all locked. The windows that had previously been broken now seemed impossible to pass through, and that's when she realized it was already dawn. She looked at the clock, 4 o'clock in the morning, but she had entered at 6 in the afternoon and thought she had only been there for 20 minutes. 8 hours had disappeared, simply evaporated, and she had no memory whatsoever of what had happened during that time. Jennifer finally managed to get out when a night security guard on patrol heard her screams and opened one of the outer doors. When she got out, she was in shock, her photos all corrupted, illegible files, except for one, a single photo that showed an empty hallway, but in the corner, partially obscured by shadows, there was a figure, a silhouette of a person standing, watching, and Jennifer swears there was no one in that hallway when she took that photo. But her story isn't unique. During the winters, when snow blankets the St. Thomas complex, residents report something even more bizarre. Footprints appear in the snow around the building, footprints that lead to locked doors, but there are never any footprints going back, as if someone had entered and decided to stay, or as if something inside the hospital were going out for a walk in the snow at night. Security teams sent to check always say the same thing. They found no one inside, but the footprints are there. Fresh, recent, impossible to ignore. St. Thomas Psychiatric Hospital represents something that goes beyond simple paranormal activity. It exposes the hidden truth about how places can absorb suffering, pain, and trauma over decades and transform that energy into something tangible, something that affects the decisions and perception of reality of those who dare to enter. It's a journey into the unknown where you don't control the rules, and when you leave, if you leave, you carry a piece of that place with you forever. If you feel that abandoned psychiatric hospitals are one of the scariest places on the planet, write this down. I would never go into St. Thomas. Local 3, Caribou Island, the lake that keeps the dead. What I'm about to tell you will change the way you see frozen lakes forever. Caribou Island isn't just a piece of land surrounded by water in the middle of Ontario. It's a place that carries such a grim reputation that even the most experienced fishermen, those who have spent their entire lives navigating those waters, avoid approaching it during the winter. And when you understand the behind-the-scenes story, when you truly delve into the accounts and experiences of those who have been there, you realize that there's something fundamentally wrong with that place, something that defies logic and transforms a simple frozen lake into a deadly trap that seems to have a consciousness of its own. Caribou Island is isolated, surrounded by waters that freeze completely during the coldest months of the Canadian winter. The ice may seem solid, even inviting, especially for those who enjoy skating, ice fishing, or simply exploring winter landscapes. But here's the hidden truth that few speak openly about. The lake around Caribou Island has a long history of tragedies. People who tried to cross the ice to reach the island simply disappeared. I'm not talking about cases where the ice broke and the body was recovered days later. I'm talking about complete disappearances. No body, no evidence. Just a gap in time where someone existed and then ceased to exist. Let me give you a concrete example that perfectly illustrates the psychological impact of this place. It was January 1994, and a group of 3 friends decided to go on an expedition to Caribou Island. They were experienced with winter activities, knew the signs of unstable ice, and had all the necessary safety equipment. The plan was simple: cross the frozen lake in the morning, explore the island during the day, and return before nightfall. 2 of them returned. The third, a man named Daniel, disappeared during the return trip. What makes this story particularly disturbing is not just the disappearance itself, but what the other 2 reported. They said Daniel was walking beside them, talking normally, and then, in the blink of an eye, he was no longer there. There was no scream, there was no sound of ice breaking, there was absolutely nothing. He simply ceased to exist. When they looked back, they saw his footprints in the snow on the ice, and these footprints stopped abruptly. There were no holes in the ice. There were no cracks. The footprints simply ended, as if Daniel had taken a step and entered another dimension. Authorities searched the entire lake. Divers were sent in as soon as the ice began to melt in the spring. Nothing was found. Zero. And here's where the story gets even stranger. In the months following the disappearance, people began reporting sightings. Fishermen who were on the lake during the summer said they saw a male figure standing on the shore of Caribou Island, looking at them, always with his back turned, always motionless, and when they tried to approach, the figure was simply no longer there, as if it were a projection, a memory trapped in time. But Daniel wasn't the first, and certainly not the last. Historical records from the region showed that since the early 1900s, at least 15 people have disappeared near Caribou Island during the winter, and all these stories have common elements that cannot be ignored. First, the silence. Witnesses always describe an absolute, oppressive silence that seems to suck up any sound around them. Second, the feeling of presence. Almost everyone reports feeling that they are not alone, even when they clearly are. And third, the shadows, dark figures seen in the distance, walking on the ice, that disappear when you try to focus on them. There's a local fisherman, a man in his 60s named Robert, who told me something that left me speechless. He said that the lake around Caribou Island doesn't give back what it takes. Those were his exact words. He explained that in the culture of the local communities, there's an ancient belief that certain places have the ability to absorb energy, memories, and even souls. And Caribou Island is one of those places. According to him, the people who disappeared didn't die in the traditional sense. They were absorbed by the place. They became part of it, and their presence is still there, trapped between the physical world and something we can't fully comprehend. This revelation completely changes the perspective on the place. We are no longer just talking about natural tragedies or accidents. We are talking about a profound transformation in how we understand the relationship between places and energy. Caribou Island represents a portal to questions that go beyond conventional science. Local 4. Silver Islet footsteps that appear after dark. Have you ever had that feeling that someone is walking behind you, but when you turn around there's no one there? Now multiply that feeling by 100 and place it in the context of a place where this experience has been repeated for over a century. I'm talking about Silver Islet, a place that should be just another story of failed mining in Ontario, but which has transformed into something far more sinister. The ruins that remain are not just stones and abandoned structures. They carry a presence that manifests itself in ways that defy any rational explanation. And the most disturbing thing, this presence seems to react specifically when humans approach during the winter. Silver Islet was a silver mining operation that functioned in the 19th century under utterly brutal conditions. The mine was located on a small rocky island in Lake Superior, one of the most dangerous and unpredictable lakes in the world. Workers faced extreme cold, violent storms, and working conditions that killed dozens of men over the years. When the mine finally closed, it left behind not only physical ruins, but an accumulated energy of suffering, despair, and death that permeates every inch of that place. And during the winter, when the snow begins to cover everything and ice forms around the island, something happens. Something that locals know well, but that tourists only discover when it's too late. The pattern is always the same. Windless nights, sub-zero temperatures, and then they begin to appear. Footprints in the snow. Not old footprints covered by new snow. Fresh footprints, as if someone had just walked there. The problem? There's no one. The ruins are deserted. There are no tourists at this time of year, no workers. There's absolutely no one who should be there. But the footprints are there, and they're not random. They follow specific paths. They circle the main ruins, and they always end at points where ancient structures used to exist, as if whoever is making these footprints is still following the original layout of the settlement. Michael, a wildlife photographer, had an experience at Silver Islet that completely changed his mindset about what is possible or impossible. It was February 2016, and he was documenting winter landscapes in the Lake Superior region. He decided to camp near the ruins of Silver Islet to capture sunrise photos. During the night, inside his tent, he began to hear footsteps in the snow outside. Slow, deliberate footsteps, walking in circles around his tent. Michael grabbed his flashlight and went out to check. There was no one there, but the footprints were there. Perfect circles around his tent. And here's the part that made his blood run cold. The footprints came from nowhere. There was no trail leading to where they began. It was as if someone had simply materialized next to his tent and started walking. He didn't sleep the rest of the night. He stayed inside the tent with his flashlight on, listening. and the footsteps returned. Several times, always walking in circles, always stopping at the exact same spot before starting again. The next morning, when daylight finally arrived, he went out and photographed the footprints. And when he noticed something he had unseen in the darkness. The footprints were unfrom modern boots. The pattern was different, ancient, as if they were from 19th century footwear. Michael left Silver Islet immediately and never returned. The photos he took clearly showed the footprints, and you can find them on various online forums for unsolved mysteries. But the footprints are only part of the story. Residents of the small community near Silver Islet speak of lights that appear among the ruins during snowy nights. They aren't constant lights, they are brief flashes, as if someone were lighting a flashlight or a candle for a few seconds before turning it off. And when brave enough people go to investigate, they never find anything. No source of light, no explanation. Just the wind, the snow, and that inescapable feeling that you're not alone, that something is there, watching, waiting. The most disturbing revelation came from a paranormal researcher named Lisa, who spent 3 nights on Silver Islet trying to document the activity. She set up cameras, audio recorders, and temperature-sensing equipment. On the second night, during a particularly intense snowstorm, her equipment picked up something. A sudden drop in temperature localized to a specific point in the ruins. And then, in the audio, a voice. It wasn't clear. It was distorted, as if passing through layers of static. But you can distinguish words, and the phrase that is repeated most often, the one Lisa managed to isolate and amplify, is, "You shouldn't be here," said repeatedly, like a warning or a threat. The psychological impact of being on Silver Islet during winter cannot be underestimated. Several people have reported the same feeling of being followed, not physically, but energetically, as if the place itself were aware of your presence and didn't like it. It's a journey into a territory where the normal rules of cause and effect simply don't apply. And when you leave, if you leave, you carry a feeling of unease that doesn't easily disappear. Write this down. Silver Islet reacts to human presence. Local 5, Mid-Canada Line radar stations abandoned, but never empty. Let me take you to the most unsettling place of all. And when I say unsettling, I'm not exaggerating. I'm talking about the Mid-Canada Line radar stations. Structures built during the Cold War to detect potential air raids from the Soviet Union. These stations are scattered across remote regions of Ontario, surrounded by dense forests where the silence is so profound you can hear your own heart beating. When they were abandoned in the 1960s, they left behind not just obsolete equipment, but something far more sinister. And the hidden truth about these places is that they were never truly empty. Something remained, and that something doesn't like visitors. What makes these stations unique in the context of haunted places is the combination of extreme isolation, abandoned technology, and stories that simply don't make sense from any logical perspective. Think about it. These structures were designed to detect invisible threats. They were places where men spent months isolated, monitoring signals, living in constant tension during one of the most paranoid periods in human history. The mindset of those who worked there was shaped by fear, distrust, and the weight of carrying the responsibility of protecting an entire nation. And when you abandon a place like that, when you let all that accumulated energy simply rot in the middle of the forest, something happens. A transformation. The place absorbs all of that and becomes something else. There's a specific case that perfectly illustrates the impact these stations have on people. It was the winter of 2008, and a group of 3 historical researchers received permission to document one of the abandoned stations. The goal was to preserve the memory of the Cold War through photos and videos. They arrived in the afternoon, with enough daylight still to explore the exterior. The structures were in ruins, rusty radar towers, buildings with broken windows, electronic equipment covered in moss and snow. But when they entered the main control building, something changed. The temperature dropped drastically. It wasn't just cold, it was something different, as if the air were charged with a heavy energy that made it difficult to even breathe. One of the researchers, Thomas, was examining a room where old radio equipment was still installed. Everything was covered in dust. Everything clearly had been without power for decades. And then it happened. One of the radios turned on. Not gradually. It was instantaneous, and it began to emit loud static. Thomas froze. The other 2 came running, and while they stood there, paralyzed, listening to that impossible static, something changed in the sound. Voices began to emerge, fragmented, distorted, but recognizable as human voices, and one of them was speaking in Russian. Thomas, who had a basic understanding of Russian because of his interest in Cold War history, managed to distinguish a few words, and what he heard made his entire belief system crumble. They're still here. They never left. The three of them ran out of the building. They left equipment behind. They left everything. And when they reached their vehicle, they noticed something terrifying. There were recent footprints in the snow around the car, footprints that definitely weren't there when they arrived. And these footprints came from the opposite direction from the station, from the forest, as if someone had been watching them all this time, waiting in the darkness of the trees. Thomas never went back to doing fieldwork in abandoned locations. His decision was clear. There are places that shouldn't be disturbed, and the Mid-Canada line stations are at the top of that list. But this is not an isolated case. Over the decades, several people who entered these stations during the winter simply disappeared. I'm not talking about getting lost in the forest. I'm talking about disappearances that make no logistical sense. In 1998, two brothers went hunting in an area near one of the stations. They knew the forest perfectly. They had GPS. They had radios. During a snowstorm, one of them sent a radio message saying they were seeking shelter in the abandoned station. That was the last communication. Search teams found signs that they had indeed entered the station, but there were no signs that they had left, and there were no bodies, just their equipment scattered in one of the rooms, as if it had been hastily abandoned. The behind-the-scenes stories reveal a consistent pattern that cannot be ignored. People who entered these stations during snowstorms report impossible electronic phenomena, equipment turning on by itself, lights flickering in systems without power, metallic sounds echoing through the empty corridors, and always, the feeling that you are not alone, that something is watching, waiting, reacting to your presence in ways you cannot predict or control. It's a journey into the unknown where the revelations you find bring no comfort, only more questions. What haunts me about the Mid-Canada line stations is that they represent something bigger. They are symbols of a period when humanity was on the brink of self-destruction, places where fear was palpable, constant, suffocating. And when you abandon places like that, when you let all that negative energy simply exist without purpose, it finds other ways to manifest itself, ways that challenge our understanding of reality. If you feel there is something deeply wrong with abandoned places that carry this kind of history, comment below. Mid-Canada line was never empty. If you've made it this far, I need to thank you, truly, because talking about these places isn't easy. Researching these stories, delving into the details, trying to understand what really happened to these people, it really gets to you. And knowing you've stayed with me throughout this journey means a lot. So let me ask you a question. Which of these 5 places left you most unsettled? Was it Spruce Falls, with that feeling of being stuck in time? St. Thomas, where the voices never stop echoing? Caribou Island, which seems to never let go of those who enter? Silver Islet, where footsteps appear out of nowhere? Or the Mid-Canada line stations, which were never truly empty? Comment below which of these places haunted you the most. And there is something else I want to know. Do you believe that certain places can absorb the energy of the people who disappeared there? That these tragedies leave a permanent mark that continues to affect those who come near? Because for me, after researching so many stories like this, it becomes increasingly difficult not to believe. These places hold something, and that something doesn't want to be forgotten. If you have local stories from your region, the kind that never appear on maps, that people know but don't like to talk about out loud, share them here in the comments. I read them all, and often it's you who suggest the next places I'll investigate. This exchange is what keeps this channel alive and growing. If this content resonated with you, if you felt that, wow, I need to know more about this connection, click the like button. This helps the video reach more people who are also fascinated by real mysteries like us. And if you're not yet subscribed to the channel, subscribe now. Every week I bring stories like this, abandoned places, unexplained disappearances, mysteries that no one else talks about, always based on real facts and in-depth investigations. And hey, comment below. I am with you until the end if you really stayed from beginning to end of this video. I want to see how many of you are brave enough to face these stories until the very last second. There's a video over here that perfectly complements this topic. If you're interested in haunted places in Ontario where the snow hides secrets, you'll want to see what I found in the next one. Click and stay with me there. See you soon.